This is a full story. Puppy wishes you all a happy and enjoyable story. In the 7th year of our marriage, Tony and his female assistant made a high-profile announcement on their blog. Stop asking, we're talking. After I liked the post, it was deleted from the blog within seconds. Soon after, Tony video called me in front of his charmingly aggrieved assistant and a bunch of mutual friends, scolding me for not understanding humor and blowing things out of proportion. 5 minutes later, the assistant's blog posted a close-up photo of her with Tony. The caption read, "You, my exclusive item. Tony interacted with her in the comments, "With you forever." Had this been before, I would have certainly taken screenshots as evidence and made a scene, crying and creating a commotion until it ended badly. But this time, I truly didn't care. When Tony came home, I was awkwardly tidying up the cake and various decorations. Yesterday was our wedding anniversary and his birthday. He said he would bring friends over to celebrate, so I had specially bought various gifts in advance, took most of the day off, and worked hard all afternoon. However, I waited all night with the cake and burned out candles, but received not even a single message from him. If I hadn't seen Serena's blog, I might not have known he changed his plans. Did you make this cake yourself? Tony was about to throw the cake into the trash when he saw me nod in confirmation and then laughed. No wonder it's so ugly. If it had been before, I would have pretended to be angry and sulked. But now, I didn't want to say a word. Seeing that I ignored him, Tony pulled out a bag, shook it, and gestured to me. "I got you your favorite Pop Mart set." This was our unspoken way of making up. Whenever he thought he had upset me, he'd buy me something I liked. But Pop Mart is something Serena likes. I had seen her share series sets on her blog. I continued with what I was doing, not reaching out to take the gift as Tony might have hoped. Seeing my lack of response, Tony put down the box and went into the kitchen by himself. "I'll fry you an egg and make you a dish." Tony is a good cook. When we first got married, I was very picky with my food, so he had specifically trained under a chef. Just as Tony cracked the egg into the pan, he received a phone call. After hanging up, he hurried into the bedroom. I smelled a burnt smell from the living room and found his phone still on the counter when I went into the kitchen. As I was about to serve the fried egg, a new message popped up on his phone. The message was from troublesome assistant. "Did you find the clothes I wanted, Tony?" Just as I was about to turn off the phone, Tony suddenly pushed me from behind. The plate in my hand slipped, and the freshly served fried egg fell all over my hand. He grabbed the phone and stuffed it into his pocket, looking at me with anger. "Can't you have any sense of boundaries? Do you have to read work messages too?" After scolding me, he first replied to the message before finally looking at me. When he saw the blisters on my hand, he frowned. "Why are you so clumsy? Can't even hold a plate properly? Forget it, I'll take you to the hospital." He said this as if it were charity. I sneered inwardly, thinking he really has some nerve. If Tony hadn't pushed me, I wouldn't have suffered like this. But since it's a matter of health and the burn area is significant, I didn't want to argue and just left with him. When I opened the car door, I was momentarily stunned. I hadn't been out with him for a long time and hadn't been in this car for ages. But this car was one of our wedding gifts. Now the passenger seat was covered with a pink fur cushion, and the front was filled with Pop Mart figurines. Even the backrest had a sticker that read "Troublesome Ghost's exclusive seat." Seeing me stunned, Tony roughly pulled me aside. I often go out with her for errands. She's a fuss, likes to decorate things, so I just went along with it. "You're not upset over such small things, are you?" I snapped back to reality and opened the rear door to sit down. Seeing Tony still outside, I calmly urged him, "It's fine, just drive." Tony got into the car with a puzzled expression and, when starting the engine, couldn't help but ask, "Aren't you going to get rid of these?" I ignored his question. Why should I get rid of them? Oh right, if it had been before, I would have gone crazy tossing everything out, and hysterically questioned why he hired someone with no sense of boundaries. What did Tony say back then? "Serena is competent at work, unlike you. But what's the point of caring now? I don't even care about Tony. So why would I care about this territorial behavior like a dog marking its spot?" Halfway to the hospital, a heavy rain suddenly started pouring. Tony frowned, picked up his phone, but for some reason, put it back down. Just as we were nearing the hospital, a call came in. It was Serena. On the other end of the line, Serena's voice, tinged with tears, was amplified in the confined car. "Tony, there's suddenly thunder, and I'm so scared. The power's out at home. Can you come over and help me?" Without even looking at me, Tony immediately changed direction towards Serena's home, while soothing her in a low voice. After hanging up, Tony finally seemed to remember me. His tone changed to one of mild politeness. "Serena has a bit of claustrophobia and is afraid of the dark. I need to go check on her first." He said this while looking at me anxiously, as if waiting for my approval. I spread my hands and told him calmly, You can go, it's your freedom. Can you drop me off at the intersection? You two are so affectionate, just don't drag me along as a third wheel. Tony's expression changed. He gritted his teeth and did not agree. I'll just check on her place quickly and then come back to take you to the hospital. I remained silent. Soon, we arrived at Serena's house. Tony pulled out some candies from the passenger seat that had appeared there at some point, and dismissively told me, I'll just go up and check and come back down quickly. Over half an hour passed quietly, but Tony still hadn't come down. My hand was hurting so much that I couldn't bear it, but thankfully, he hadn't locked the car. I got out and took a taxi to the hospital. After tending to my wound and returning home, Tony was busy cooking. Seeing me come in, he cast an annoyed glance my way. Why didn't you call me to pick you up? Indeed, he had sent me a message over half an hour ago. For the past 7 years of marriage, I had always responded to his messages immediately. I shrugged casually and gave a vague excuse. My phone died and shut off, so I didn't see it. Tony was busy packing the food into a thermal box. He glanced at me, pursed his lips, and handed me a gift bag from the coffee table. I remember you liked this brand of perfume, so I bought you a bottle. I looked up and met his gaze that seemed to be filled with false benevolence. I didn't take it. I turned and sat on the sofa, saying calmly, I don't like this brand anymore. Give it to someone who does. Before I came back, I had already seen Serena's new blog post. Rainy day emo, shopping is the only way to cheer up. The accompanying photo showed her trying on a bracelet, with a bag holding hand in the corner of the image. The wrist was adorned with the commemorative gift I had given her last year. Seeing me indifferent as I scrolled through my phone, Tony approached with an unhappy expression, trying to check my injury. I was startled and accidentally knocked over the perfume on the table. Tony thought I was throwing a tantrum and sneered. Are you seriously having a tantrum? Serena is like a sister to me. Why are you upset with a girl? Tony seemed to have a sudden realization and sarcastically said, You always claim to hate female rivalry, but you act like a jealous little girl. Look at your age. I was thoroughly annoyed, put down my phone, shrugged, and calmly explained to Tony, I'm not angry. It's your business how you treat her. It's not my place to comment. Indeed, his heart and body belonged to him. Would he stop doing things just because I dislike them? Hearing this, Tony seemed to be laughing in anger. This isn't jealousy? You weren't like this before. How did you become this person? Tony straightened up, looking at me with disgust. I have things to do and won't be coming back for a few days. Talk to me when you're more mature. With that, Tony grabbed the thermal box and left without looking back. I didn't care about him and actually enjoyed the solitude. I played games, took a bath, and had a long, restful sleep. The next day, I went to work refreshed, and we secured a big deal for our team. My boss, Alice, came over, patted my shoulder, and smiled. I haven't seen you this energetic in a long time. Is there some good news? I smiled and nodded. Yes, I'm preparing for a divorce. Alice looked surprised and asked curiously, That's indeed significant. Why are you thinking of getting divorced? A bitter smile appeared on my face. It's just some relationship issues, but it's all in the past. I then asked, Alice, do you know any lawyers in this area? Could you recommend someone? Alice hugged me and pulled out 2 small cakes from her desk, handing them to me. Of course, there's a department party tonight. You must come. I agreed with a smile. Our department usually had a party for big deals, but I hadn't attended one in a long time, having been preoccupied with Tony. It was a good opportunity to embrace a new life. In the evening, I arrived at the location Alice had sent me. Not long after I entered, I encountered an unexpected guest. Tony looked delighted to see me. How did you know I was here? Before I could explain, he forcefully pulled me along. Our group of friends hasn't seen you for a while. Come and join us. Although it was supposed to be a gathering of friends. As soon as we opened the private room door, Serena appeared amid the fireworks. Serena's sweet smile turned into a frown as soon as she saw me, but she quickly changed her attitude and, with a beaming smile, came over and put her arm around mine. Sister-in-law, you're here. We're having a party today to celebrate my big project. I immediately pulled my arm away from her. Serena looked hurt. Is it that you're not used to others linking arms with you? Sorry, sister-in-law. The noise from the private room and the music was giving me a headache. And I didn't tolerate her any further, directly confronting her. Yes, I don't like it, especially not you. Just touching me makes me feel like I reek of tea. I gave her a once-over. Tea cakes that are decades old can sell for a good price, but decades of foolishness, even wrapped in a layer of tea flavor, are worthless. As soon as I finished speaking, Serena's eyes were filled with tears, though she tried to hold them back with a brave face. Tony, unable to tolerate this, shielded Serena behind him and looked at me with disgust. You have no consideration for the occasion. You haven't learned to be mature at all. Why are you always targeting Serena? Did she offend you? I sneered. Didn't he understand the reason himself? The surrounding sycophants saw the situation wasn't right and quickly came over to mediate. One after another, they offered me drinks. Serena continued to cry silently behind Tony, while Tony grandly shielded her from the alcohol. Everyone then looked at me. Seeing that I hadn't touched my drink, Tony coldly questioned me. Serena has been drinking to apologize. What more are you dissatisfied with? Serena, now with Tony's support, stopped crying and feigned innocence. Yes, sister. Tony and I are fine. Yes, sis, just be magnanimous and drink it, others chimed in. I snorted, then poured the drink over Tony and Serena. Then I slammed the glass onto the floor. The entire room went silent. I sarcastically said, it's all about the cuckold. Do I need to distinguish between deep cuckold and light cuckold? After saying that, I ignored the reactions of the others and turned straight out of the private room. I had just taken a few steps when Tony chased after me. He urgently grabbed my hand, looking at me with a mix of helplessness and seriousness. I've told you that there's nothing between me and Serena. Why don't you believe me? He then shifted to a tone of disappointment and said, you've disappointed me so much. You have no tolerance and always interfere with my work. Can't you understand me a little bit? I pulled my hand away from his grasp and slapped him hard. Serena, who had followed Tony out, exclaimed and hurried to support him. Seeing him look at me in disbelief, I actually laughed. You and you. I pointed at both of them. I wish you both happiness, okay? I looked at them with disdain. Do you even have any self-awareness? Do you not know the meaning of shame at your age? And I thought there were no more longevity secrets? I said sarcastically to Tony, how is it possible that someone lives from the Qing dynasty until now? As soon as I finished speaking, Tony's face turned a colorful palette. I couldn't be bothered to argue with them any longer and turned to leave. Tony, unwilling to accept it, threatened me from behind. Haley, you've really gone too far this time. Let's just get a divorce. Only then did I start to seriously consider him, turning back with a slight smile. All right, I'll prepare the divorce agreement in a few days. Remember to sign it. Divorce was something I longed for. As I turned, I didn't miss his shock followed by determination, nor Serena's secret delight. Tony's shock was at my mention of divorce, while his determination was the subconscious belief that I wouldn't actually leave him. Indeed, in the 7 years of marriage, every argument, even if it was a big fight, I would always make up with him within 3 days. And the last time he proposed divorce, I had no dignity, begging him for some pity. Now, I just felt indifferent. In fact, at the moment of saying goodbye, it felt like a huge weight that had been hanging in the air for so long had dropped. All these years, I had been deeply melancholic about the farewells I had rehearsed, but when those words were spoken, I found it as easy as deciding what to eat tonight. At certain moments, I seemed to feel true happiness, which is why I had been obsessed with Tony. But those moments of happiness now seemed like just his favor. Those happy moments were mixed with too many fragments that didn't belong to us. Like eating a perfectly cooked egg filled with broken eggshells. This marriage was rotten from the moment I stepped into it. As I walked, a bitterness rose involuntarily in my heart. I am allergic to alcohol, but he thought not drinking at the wedding banquet was disrespectful to his friends, so he hadn't taken me to gatherings for a long time. He said, it's just a glass of wine. Why make such a fuss? It's really pretentious. Turns out he could smoothly shield others from drinking. Seeing the reality clearly, my heart suddenly felt transparent. Returning to the department's gathering room, although I hadn't attended a party in a long time, the atmosphere was still great. During the event, Tony kept sending me messages. I was a bit harsh earlier. When will you be home? I'm waiting for you next door. Why aren't you replying? I really don't understand why you won't drink a single glass of wine. Don't you love female rivalry and pleasing men? You don't want to show off. Come home. I've made a hangover soup for you. Starting from the second message, I turned on a do not disturb. Previously, I had looked forward to his messages, but now it felt like someone was just spewing filth on my phone. We played until late. Since I had the next morning off, I booked a hotel room and went to sleep. The next noon, as I arrived downstairs at the office, I turned on my phone, which had been on silent, and found not only countless messages, but also several missed calls from Tony at different times. I ignored all the other messages. I only replied to, "Then let's get divorced." As soon as I sent the reply, Tony's call came through immediately. The call started with aggressive questioning. "Why didn't you reply to my messages? Where did you go if not home?" I felt he was being unreasonable. I replied impatiently, "I'm at work, big brother. I'm very busy." Tony's voice came through gritted teeth. "Are you sure?" I turned around and saw Tony looking exhausted standing behind me. Tony looked like he had stayed up all night. "Where did you go yesterday? I waited for you all night." In a public place, I couldn't help but feel some disdain. We're all adults here. We have our own things to do. It's not like I asked you to wait for me. And who are you to control me? Tony probably never imagined that his words would come back to him. He began to lose his composure. "Can you stop being unreasonable? Can we talk about this properly at home?" He then tried to pull me away. I slapped his hand away forcefully, looking at him with disdain. "Can't you understand plain talk? I still have to work. You're the one being unreasonable." I patted my hand as if afraid of any residual dirt. Tony's eyes flashed with pain. Just as he was about to speak, the phone rang again. After answering the call, he apologized and said, "Wife, Serena got trapped in the elevator. I'm the only one with an elevator card. I'll go over there first." Another special situation. Menstrual pain needing a hospital, thunderstorm causing a power outage, cold weather needing others' clothes, exhaustion requiring others to dine with you, friends needing to mingle with other friends. I was worried about how to send him off. It was like giving a pillow when one needs to nap. I waved disinterestedly. "Go ahead." He took 2 steps, then as if making a major decision, turned back and said, "I don't agree with the divorce." I replied perfunctorily, "Let's discuss it over a meal in a few days." Tony, seeming to have received some promise of not divorcing, finally left with a sense of relief. Tony never returned and didn't go home. I was quite relieved to have no one causing trouble. 2 days later, I wanted to arrange a meeting with him to discuss the divorce. So I took the initiative and sent him a message. "Afternoon meeting? Let's talk." He quickly replied, "Have you thought it through? I'm still on a business trip. How about tomorrow? Talk about the divorce." There was sudden silence from his side, and after a long while, he replied, "There are still some things to deal with here. Let's talk in a few days. Tell me when you've thought it through." I responded curtly, "A few days is fine, but if not, I'll sue you." Tony quickly sent a voice message, his anger evident. "Do you really have to be so absolute, Haley? Even when given an opportunity, you don't take it?" I calmly typed back, "I said it's a divorce, and it's a divorce." Tony suddenly softened his tone. "Haley, we talked about solving problems and being together for life." I didn't even finish reading his message before I impatiently closed the chat window. "Yes, we said that during our relationship, but was the problem created by me? Was it me who broke the promise to stay together? Now you're using promises of love to manipulate me?" As I scrolled through Facebook, my blog recommended new content from Serena, the most beautiful town in China, Suzhou. The accompanying photos showed her at various Suzhou landmarks, with another person's presence noticeable in many of them. Suzhou was the place Tony and I had promised to visit when we got married. In the 7 years, I had had opportunities to go, but every time I wanted to visit Suzhou, Tony would question me. "Who's in Suzhou? Why do you want to go there?" At those times, he would lecture me. "Why are you always running around after we're married? Isn't it better to stay at home and wait for me?" So I waited and waited for 7 years, only to receive news of him going to Suzhou with someone else. How ironic. After waiting 2 days, I couldn't wait any longer and directly sent him a divorce agreement. Tony didn't respond, and I ignored him, starting the process of filing for divorce. That afternoon, someone sent 999 roses to the office. I knew immediately who it was from, so I paid the money and asked the cleaning staff to dispose of them. When I called, Tony answered with a cheerful tone. "Did you see the flowers I sent? I remember you used to love flowers." I paused for a moment before speaking directly. "That was something I liked before, Tony. I don't like it anymore." I frowned, thinking of the commotion caused by the huge bouquet, and found it troublesome. "How old are you? Acting so immaturely only makes things difficult for me." Tony fell silent immediately, the previous joy in his voice gone. After a few seconds, he said, "Afternoon meeting?" "Sure," I agreed readily. In the afternoon, I arrived early with the divorce agreement, but Tony arrived even earlier. Accompanying him was Serena. I didn't say much, just took out the divorce agreement and placed it on the table. Tony seemed to ignore it entirely, handing me the menu. "Since you're here, why not eat something first?" "No," I refused. "I'm not here to eat with you." Tony's face stiffened, and he urgently explained. "Serena and I have a purely superior subordinate relationship. There's nothing between us. He nudged Serena, who spoke up defensively. I only chat with Tony about work. We haven't talked about anything else. I looked at them with irritation, almost laughing in anger. Don't. I raised my hand to stop them from speaking further. Don't make it look like I'm breaking up a couple. I genuinely wish you both well. No matter what your relationship is, I don't care. I just hope for a peaceful divorce. Is that okay? I said this with sincere intent. Tony, however, seemed surprised, looking at me with a family drama expression. Haley, stop making a fuss. I didn't intend to divorce you. I felt a sense of helplessness at his inability to communicate rationally. I told him seriously, I'm not making a fuss. If you don't want a peaceful divorce, then be ready for a lawsuit. With that, I had no intention of staying longer and got up to leave. Tony grabbed my hand, trying to pull me back forcefully. I struggled to break free. Just then, a familiar face walked in at the door. I quickly called out, Rocky, I'm over here. Rocky was a college classmate who had confessed his feelings for me back in school. At that time, I was wholeheartedly focused on Tony, so I rejected him and gradually lost contact. I wondered if he would be willing to help me. Rocky looked in the direction of my voice and quickly walked over to me. I took Rocky's arm and tried to leave. Serena, who was nearby, attempted to hold on to Tony but was pushed away by him. Tony stared at me and Rocky, knowing that Rocky had pursued me in college. Haley, it's not like this. You still love me, right? I didn't want to leave him with any false hopes, so I directly said, Tony, I can say clearly that I no longer like you. Regardless of who I like now, it's certainly not you. I gave him a disdainful look, smirking as I said, you have no tolerance at all. Seeing you just makes me feel disgusted. With that, I walked out with Rocky. As for how long Tony stood there, looking dejected, that was no longer my concern. As I just walked out of the restaurant, I felt a bit embarrassed and apologized to Rocky. I'm sorry, I used you as a pawn on a whim. Rocky still wore his usual gentle smile and said, it's okay. It sounds like you two are getting a divorce. I didn't hide it and nodded directly in acknowledgement. Rocky's eyes seemed to light up instantly, and he comforted me with a smile. That's all right, old things have to go before new things can come. I smiled back at him gratefully. Then I'll take your good wishes. I'll treat you to a meal next time. I glanced at the time and apologetically told Rocky, I need to go back to work. If you need anything, send me a message. Shall I give you a ride? Rocky asked. I declined the offer politely. No need, it's just nearby. After finishing up at work, I immediately went home, packed my belongings, and moved back into my own place. However, every night, I could see a familiar car parked downstairs. I remained indifferent. If he wants to park there, it's none of my business. On a rainy evening a month later, I suddenly received the news that my most beloved aunt had passed away. I rushed back to my hometown overnight. The next day, as it rained, while we were keeping vigil at home, an unexpected guest arrived. Tony walked in. He was brought in by my uncle, but I hadn't had the chance to tell them about my divorce filing. Before Tony could speak, I unceremoniously kicked him out. Then I sternly warned my relatives. I told them that if anyone let him in, I would never return to this home. Since my parents had already passed away, I had little attachment to this house. Speaking of this, my hatred for Tony deepened. When I received the news of my parents' car accident death on my phone, I was cooking. Due to Serena, I had a big fight with him, and he deleted my messages. When I hurriedly returned home after receiving more messages, my parents had already been buried. When I questioned Tony upon my return, he simply responded in his usual self-righteous manner. You don't understand at all. If you don't suffer a bit, how will you learn your lesson? You're an adult, still playing these games. Isn't it just life and death? How shameful. His tone, as if it was for my own good, was deeply etched in my heart. The rain lasted for 3 days and nights. During the day, Tony stood outside in the rain waiting for me, and at night, he slept in his car. On the third day, someone hurriedly told me, Haley, your ex-husband collapsed. Do you want to come and see him? When I arrived at the small clinic, Tony was just waking up. Seeing that I was finally willing to see him, he looked at me anxiously. Please, Haley. He struggled to get up with his exhausted body, the needle got jostled, and it began to bleed. His bloodied hand grasped my clothing. We should not divorce. I don't want to divorce you. He looked at me earnestly, as if he were about to cry any second. I know I was wrong, Haley. I've already fired Serena. Please don't divorce me, okay? I already knew about Serena's dismissal. When she left the company, she even attempted to claim labor arbitration, but was exposed by Tony for multiple work-related issues. I went to Suzhou before, only because I remembered you wanted to go there. I intended to do some research in advance. I didn't plan to bring Serena, but when you said you wanted a divorce, I got a little angry. Tony seemed to recall something and urgently explained, faced with his tearful and desperate pleading. I took a step back in disgust, freed my clothing from his grasp, and dusted off the non-existent dust. Even without Serena, I wouldn't reconcile with you. I looked directly at him. For me, even without Serena, there will be Darina, Herena. You're disgusting. Do you understand? I said each word clearly, delivering my final verdict. Then I gave him a sarcastic smile. Tony, it's not life and death, so why make such a scene? It's just a divorce. Watching my unfeeling back, Tony pleaded. Can you give me a reason? If you do, I'll agree to the divorce. I turned around and looked at him. In that moment, all the bits and pieces of the past started flooding back into my mind. The helplessness I once cried over all night had now settled into calm. I looked at him, as if to conclude. Do you know, Tony, I always felt I was a bit of a failure. I originally thought you didn't know how to love, so I patiently taught you. I taught you how to properly care for a partner during their period. I taught you how to find joy in the mundane details of life. I taught you how to steadfastly walk through our long 7-year journey. I taught you how to accept and respond to love, but you always seemed unwilling to listen to me, always messing things up, but always confident I wouldn't leave you. You were always so self-assured, always trampling on my love, as if that would make you look better. Only now do I realize that it wasn't that you didn't know how to love, you just didn't like me. You would thoughtfully prepare warm chocolate for her during her period and advise her to stay home and rest. You would message her in the early hours, listening to her complain about the trivialities of life. You would carefully shield her from alcohol but forgot about my alcohol allergy, thinking I was being unreasonable. We had planned a 7-year trip to Suzhou, on the eve of our marriage falling apart. You went on a business trip and brought her along, staying behind to enjoy the scenery of Jiangnan with her. You told me you were making plans for Suzhou, intending to make it up to me with this trip. But what plans require you two to go alone to complete? You said you loved me, but what about her? Is it truly just friendship? I don't see this as a failure anymore. For me, even if this failed path lasted 7 years, it's still timely to cut my losses. After saying this, I completely let go of the final burden. I coldly stared at him. I came today because I don't want you to die here. It would be very unpleasant. I have already filed for divorce. Just wait. After saying this, I turned and left without any attachment. After hearing my words, Tony was stunned for a long time. Finally, after the 4-drip was finished, he quietly left. A few months later, one deep night, I received a call from one of our mutual friends. Sis, Tony is drunk. He's drunk to the point of almost causing a stomach perforation. He keeps mumbling your name. Can you come over? The caller's voice was anxious amid a noisy background, with Tony's voice faintly mumbling my name. I found this childish drama quite boring and amusing. I paused for a few seconds and said, "Don't you all often take care of him? You'll manage." Then I hung up the phone. Without worries to disturb me, I slept soundly. After more than half a year of smooth sailing, he had not disturbed me again. However, at the end of September, I received a call from an unknown number. Hello, is this Ms. Haley? Yes. I was still puzzled about what the caller wanted. The caller then directly stated their purpose. We are from the hospital. Your relative Tony has been in a car accident and is in critical condition. Could you come to see him? Listening to this, my thoughts drifted back to when I had appendicitis. At that time, I was in unbearable pain, but Tony ignored my distress and thought I was making a fuss. It's just appendicitis pain. It's not going to kill you. Why are you being so dramatic? How dare you ask me to take you to the hospital? Can't you see I'm busy? Eventually, I struggled to make a 911 call myself and was taken to the hospital. Hello? I then came to my senses and replied with a smile. Sorry, you've got the wrong number. A year later, I finally received the court's divorce decree, and I became the team leader of a standalone team. Just as our team secured a major project, I happily announced a week-long vacation to Suzhou for everyone. Everyone cheered with joy. Meanwhile, Tony, sitting in a wheelchair and looking withered, lifted his head, intending to say something, but then lowered it again. But who cares? The place I had dreamed of visiting since I was 17 was finally reached after a decade of journeying. It was the plum rain season. I opened the window, took a deep breath of the damp, slightly cool rain, and extended my hand to catch a handful of Suzhou's rain. In a daze, it felt like returning to the summer when I was 17. Through the misty raindrops, I saw once again the boy holding an umbrella and feeding the cat. The end. If you like Puppy's story, please follow and like it. Updated every morning at 9 a.m.